Hello, everyone. As everyone already know, Trump and Netanyahu announced a plan in principle, a peace plan of 20 points. How it will be implemented, what are the obstacles, or who might be the obstacles? We focus on what has not been said also during the press conference, specifically that no questions from journalists or reporters were taken. But to answer some of these important questions, we have one of the experts in the Middle East process and the peace between Palestinians and Israelis, Robert Satloff. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with the plan. 20-step plan, 20 points. What is so different in terms of this plan in order for the world or the Middle East or Palestinians to have, or Israelis to have any hope in this plan that could be different in the way it's going to be implemented?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. This is a very important moment. We are about to mark the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, and therefore the second anniversary of this horrific war. And so we're all hopeful that this plan offers a path to end the war. What makes it different is not so much the content, but the fact that so many different parties are endorsing the basic ideas within the plan. Namely, this is the first document in 2 years that has the strong endorsement of the Israelis, the White House, and a broad array of Arab and Muslim leaders. The one and the only party that is still uncertain, from whom we have not heard a clear response, is Hamas. And Hamas, of course, gets a vote. Without Hamas, it is highly unlikely this plan can go forward. It does have a clause in it that envisions the possibility of Hamas not participating, but I don't think that's a realistic option. What makes this special is that there are so many different stakeholders that support it, which is unlike any other effort before. We're waiting for one key element, which is Hamas.
There is one point, which is point 20 in this 20 points plan from Trump that says there would be a Palestinian state. How do you think the ultra-nationalists in Israel reacted to this, knowing that the coalition and the government is formed by that? And we heard that the first thing that Netanyahu revealed to a Hebrew audience after the press event where Trump revealed his 20-point plan, he said, no way that's going to happen. And that was also to respond that he has no intention to withdrawing Israeli troops from Gaza.
So I think the point that you're referring to that includes reference to a Palestinian state is a bit more subtle and a bit more nuanced than what you suggested, which is that it offers a pathway for discussions toward a Palestinian state, not a preordained agreement about the outcome that the two sides have already settled. What it does is it addresses the political needs of key parties, in this case the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others, that what happens in Gaza from day one has some eventual linkage to their long-term objective, which includes the vision of a Palestinian state. It doesn't commit the parties to that outcome, an irreversible outcome, but it does commit them to potentially discussing that idea down the road. As to the issue of Israeli withdrawal, it is an issue, the details of which still need to be worked out. On one hand, there is a commitment to Israeli withdrawal from the Strip, from Gaza, in phases. On the other hand, there's also a clear notion in the plan that Israel will still maintain, even for the foreseeable future, a strip of territory in the periphery of Gaza. Even after all the withdrawals are done, Israel will still retain a narrow security belt on the border of Gaza, which the Israelis contend is essential to provide buffer to prevent any possible reoccurrence of the October 7th attack. So that will be a narrow strip, perhaps a half a kilometer, perhaps a kilometer. I'm not sure exactly which. It's tough to tell from the map. But even when the withdrawals will be complete, it does envision this narrow buffer zone along the periphery of the Gaza boundary.
What else do you think no one is saying out loud from this plan?
So I think there are a couple of significant and yet not fully defined aspects. One has to do with disarmament. Disarmament done the right way is a very intrusive, demanding, and comprehensive process that requires the confiscation, the destruction, and of existing weaponry, the destruction of all underground tunnels. I mean, literally filling them with cement and blocking them off, and the prevention of any possible diversion of materials for the industrial production of new weapons, which is what we saw over the past 10 years. After all, that's how Hamas was able to build their rockets and to dig deep underground. So this is a very detailed, intrusive process if done right. Hamas has so far rejected any idea of this in previous plans. We have to see whether or not they will accept it this time. The other, I think, wild card has to do with the eventual role of the Palestinian Authority or its agents or security aspects. The Israelis, Netanyahu, yesterday listed quite a long agenda of reforms that the Palestinian Authority would need to take before it could be even a legitimate contributor or participant in this process, let alone inherit political leadership of Gaza. And that included things that it has so far refused to do, such as recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So we still have a long way to go to see whether these things can be reconciled.
What about the enforcement or the enforcement question that is in the center right now? Who supplies, leads, and pays the international stabilization force that has been discussed? And under what rules of engagement when spoilers strike?
So these are all very good questions. I tend to think that the financing issue is one of the least of the pressing issues. We are talking about some wealthy countries that are willing to support this process and who would probably much prefer to pay in dinars and rials than in paying in the deployment of their own troops to Gaza. So I don't think the financing is going to be the big challenge.
Why would
I think you're right to point out. I think you're right to point out that the rules of engagement is going to be a significant challenge because it's one thing for deployment of a Pakistani regiment or an Indonesian regiment to protect civilians. It's another thing for that regiment to actively and forcibly disarm a Hamas unit that doesn't want to be disarmed. That would require a level of engagement and willingness to fight that I don't think many people believe those third countries are willing to put up.
But why do you think those countries who you mentioned that they have the money are willing to pay the money? What are they gaining from paying and helping?
So I think there's an enormous need for collecting ordnance, like unused bombs and weaponry. For rehabilitation, reconstruction, putting the basic necessities of life, which will help tens of thousands of ordinary Palestinian citizens. This will respond, I think, quite well to popular desires within these countries to be helping. to be providing, services, humanitarian support. I think these countries are very happy to do that, especially if they know there's an overarching political and security commitment that what they're spending their money on will not be wasted. If that's the case, I think we're going to see the financing.
When we talk about foreign enforcers, it's not about only money. If we are going to talk about some figures like Tony Blair that has been mentioned yesterday, Tony Blair is seen in the Arab world as a war criminal. He even himself in a 2016 speech admitted of the war crime and the atrocities done toward Iraqis. How and why would a figure like that would be seen as something like conciliatory, if you want to put it that way?
So the question is not whether the figure is conciliatory. The question is whether he's effective, whether he can serve, he or anyone else can contribute to the effective implementation of this plan. This is what all parties are focused on, moving from 2 years of horrific war and bloodshed to a process of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and humanitarian support. If Tony Blair can be effective in this role, and if the overall chairman of this effort, the head of the Board of Peace, President Donald Trump, believes that Tony Blair can be effective, then he'll play a significant role. He won't be the only one, of course. There will be other, there'll be a whole superstructure that is built up of significant, competent, well-respected people. But it does sound like Mr. Blair will play a significant role in this.
But Tony Blair's role is reported and may be seen as, or could be, a liability with Palestinians, different parties or fractions, who Palestinians, again, and Arabs would remember his past initiatives that went nowhere. Why would this one be so different, you think? Just because Trump said so?
Well, actually, Donald Trump wields an awful lot of authority at this moment, and if Mr. Blair's appointment, should it happen, and it hasn't happened to any executive role, if it has the support of those Arab and Muslim governments who supported through their declaration just yesterday President Trump's plan and his statement delivered at the White House, I don't think it's going to be an obstacle to his playing a role. It's probably one of the least important of the obstacles that people will face. I think much more significant are the gaps within the plan, the timetable for implementation, the definitions of things like disarmament, peaceful coexistence. I mean, these are broad terms. There's a phrase in there. If Hamas members vow to support peaceful coexistence with Israel and give up their weapons, they'll be given amnesty. Well, what does peaceful coexistence mean? Does that mean a renunciation of resistance? Does that mean accepting Israel as a Jewish state? What does peaceful coexistence mean? There's a lot of details that still need to be worked out. I think the Blair question is actually one of the least important.
What about the legitimacy of what would be the Palestinian authority over the foreseen Palestinian state? A technocratic Palestinian cabinet that looks U.S. appointed will struggle probably for legitimacy in Gaza streets, in the West Bank streets. How much do you think legitimacy is the quiet killer if the names of who is going to run is the least important?
So again, I think that the most important aspect in terms of legitimacy will come back to this very simple principle that nothing succeeds like success. If indeed this process leads to the end of the war, the flooding of the territory with humanitarian goods, peaceful, secure distribution of those goods, the beginning of rehabilitation, the beginning of reconstruction, and an Israeli withdrawal from anywhere that Palestinians live in Gaza, then the actual names of the people who are responsible for that mean much less than the fact that those services and those products are being delivered. It is the delivery, the fulfilling of the commitments that will provide the legitimacy to what is being constructed.
To what extent the doubts and fears that this plan would just die out like any other plan, like the Oslo Accords? Two parties agreed, but then the implementation along the way had so many obstacles, so many mines. It's like walking in a minefield. Again, why would this be so different, given that Netanyahu's personal legal and political horizon probably would distort also the incentives, given that some voices today in Israel already disagreed to some of these points in the 20 points plan?
So this is a very good question, and it is a real and serious problem that the advocates of this plan will have to face should it begin its implementation. There will be opponents to this every step of the way. Different parts of both Israeli and Palestinian politics will oppose different aspects of this, and that's what is the responsibility of the implementers to ensure that the plan, if it goes forward, is an integral whole, that it is protected from those who want to divert it in one direction or the other. Donald Trump just made this his plan. That's the key aspect for anyone who is looking at the holes in it, anyone who's looking at the gaps, anyone who's a skeptic. And I'm quite skeptical about aspects of this myself. But you asked me at the beginning of this conversation, what makes this different? What makes this different is Donald Trump just made it his plan. Now, we do have a record of Donald Trump's peace plans going nowhere. In 2020, Donald Trump announced the deal of the century to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. January 2020. It was dead within days. Hopefully, this plan has a much longer life than that plan, because real lives are at stake.
Real lives are at stake, and definitely time and the future will tell how this plan will be implemented. Thank you for giving us some answers about some very important questions regarding this press conference and the future of the Israeli-Palestinian war and conflict in Gaza. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.